Hey kids and welcome. It's time for Conscious Embodiment, Astrology and Dreams with Dr. Michael Lennox. I am your host, Dr. Michael Lennox, coming at you for the week of December 12th through the 18th. Checking in with producer Zoe. How you holding up, Zoe? The full moon's behind us, thank God.
Yeah, I'm just focused on getting everything I need to get done. It's like that, that end of the year feeling.
Well, yeah.
I like end of the year goals rather than beginning of the year goals.
Well, say more about that for a second. That's very interesting because it reminds me of something that happens as we move through these last three signs of the year. Scorpio, Sag, and into Capricorn.
Yeah, I just feel like maybe it's because there's a deadline, but I feel a lot more passionate about like looking at the last 4 months of the year and kind of having goals and like, oh, what is it that I wanted to wrap up this year? Or what is it? How am I doing with how I hope to show up in the world in this moment? Rather than, starting the year off and being like, okay, this year, here are all my goals.
Which doesn't work anyway. That's why we get overwhelmed with resolution consciousness and why we should really focus on more of what you are presenting, which is let's finish up the year. Let's go into the Scorpio mansion and dig out the below. That's what we do in Scorpio. Then in Sag, we're sort of promised what's possible because we've excavated some material. And then in a week or so, we're going to be moving into the Capricorn mansion, where we then get to set intentions for what comes next because we've marinated ourselves in the idea of if I clean out the inside, Scorpio, and expand on the outside, Sagittarius, then I'm well prepared to beat next year automatically because I've done exactly what you're talking about, sort of doing the download at the end of the year to meet the year ahead with a little bit fuller a cup. And we'll be talking about this more next week when we're in the Capricorn mansion and we hit the new moon in Capricorn that I think is better for your intentions for next year than any resolution might be at the top of the year.
Yeah, and that's not to say that I'm not going to think about what I'm doing next year in January, but the nitty gritty and the really getting it done and the checking the boxes it's something I like to do in the last 4 months. Yeah, so let's get into it.
But actually, before we get into the week's weather, I want to answer a question that came in from listener Suzanne, which reminded me, so that you and I haven't actually said this out loud to our listening audience. If you guys have questions about astrology, send them in.
Oh, yeah, totally.
Like we've never solicited it, but like I am completely open to questions. And Suzanne wrote me, listen, not everybody that listens to the podcast is at the same level of working with astrology, right? And so I've been talking so much about Chiron in the last couple of months because he's been very engaged in a healing process by hitting the south node in the Great Eliminator angle, which I mentioned last week, and I'll talk about in the next 2 weeks podcast as this healing transit plays out. But Suzanne wrote, she said, would you kindly explain Chiron a little further in your upcoming podcast? I'm still a little confused on what this refers to. So yay, awesome. Teaching moment.
Cool, I love it.
Well, Chiron is a fascinating body in our solar system. Every other planet in our solar system was generated out of what was here, like the disk of dust and particles and rocks and gas that is our solar system coalesced around itself in these little vortexes of energy throughout the solar system that eventually became our planets. Our system is one disk of energy now sort of expressed as a bunch of different planets and asteroids. We know many of them. We've mapped out our solar system quite fully. Chiron is not from here. Chiron is from somewhere else in outer space. Chiron was probably a comet or a large asteroid that had its own sort of trajectory hurtling through interstellar space passed close enough by us that our sun's gravitational pull grabbed him, pulled him in, and made him part of our solar system. Because Chiron has its own sort of trajectory of motion and a gravitational sort of thrust that it entered this system with, his orbit became very erratic. It changes speed. Its retrogrades are not predictable in the same way that the other planets in the solar system, and it appears to move very erratically. And some very brilliant astronomer back in, I think Chiron was discovered in 1977, named this body for a mythological figure that wanders erratically. Chiron was a healer, a trainer. He knew the healing arts and how to work with herbs and magic, but also combat and warrior consciousness. He was sort of the whole Megillah when it comes to training. And in training Heracles, he suffered a mortal wound, a blow to his hip that should have killed him. But it didn't kill him because Chiron's not a human being. Chiron is a centaur, half horse on the bottom and man on the top. This makes him half divine. So as a half god, Chiron is immortal, cannot die. So imagine that conundrum. Mortal wound, cannot die. That sets up a relationship to wound that has become one of the most important pieces of our consciousness as human beings attempting to self-actualize and grow. Our healings don't occur because the wounds disappear. It's not magic. We lean into the wounded consciousness, we reformulate how we're going to relate to it, and we change and transmute our inner perceptions of that wound until we find the gifts that came from it, we integrate the occurrences that rose it up, and we let go of the grief and rage that it might have inspired, and we move along through life healed because we've changed our perception of the wound in the first place.
Beautiful.
So Chiron's movement and transits that involve Chiron are bringing that wounded healing consciousness along with it. And so when Chiron is up to stuff in the solar system, healing is what's sort of being reflected. And again, I'll talk about this in greater depth either next week or in 2 weeks when this hits for the 5th time. But since the end of summer through the end of the year, Chiron has been holding the great eliminator angle with the south node in Scorpio. The great eliminator angle, the 150-degree transit that allows us to release things from the past, and this being driven by Chiron, who's looking to free us of wounds of the past. This entire autumn and early winter is driven by this inner deep healing process. That's why eclipse season was extra doozy-ish. That's why Mars's retrograde is kind of brutal, because we're changing behaviors by moving through our unconscious a little bit with Mars backwards. And all of these energies are being driven by Chiron's great eliminator angle with the south node to make right in alignment with what you were saying at the top of the show, Zoe, making the last 4 months of the year outrageously activated in the direction of healing old wounds and transforming how we perceive those wounded spaces so that we might move through our lives more effective, more powerful, and healed.
Yeah, that's not. I like answering queries.
Yeah, so please write me an email, michael@michaellenx.com, if you have questions about astrology, general questions. I'm not going to look up your chart. So if your question involves your birth information, I probably won't read it. But if it's a general question about astrology, please do write to us. So today is December 12th, which also happens to be the day that Mercury starts his retrograde shadow. Mercury is in Capricorn, which means he's in territory ruled by Saturn. So Mercury in this sign is very caught up with what's the goal, what's the purpose, where are my ambitions going to take me? And because Mercury's going to go retrograde, he's going to hang out for like 10, 11 weeks in this sign, though he typically would spend only like 2.5 weeks in the sign if he was at his regular pace. All of the next 4 Mercury retrogrades are in Earth signs, starting with this one, and then all of the 2023 Mercury retrogrades are in Earth signs. That's beneficial for us because Earth is the most grounded element. Mercury retrogrades are challenging because of the airiness of communication, and that planet going backwards, it messes up our precision and our clear communication and all of the bumpy stuff that happens with Mercury retrograde is going to be more intense in air signs and I think also in fire signs because they are fast, powerful, combustible energy. And so Mercury backwards in those signs are also very discombobulating. Now listen, Mercury retrograde's a Mercury retrograde. Nobody's going to get out of bumping into the furniture while the planet of communication is moving backwards. But it will be less, I think, we will be less off kilter because Mercury is in a solid, stable, earthy, grounded sign.
That makes sense to me.
He is at 8 degrees of Cap. That's the point of the beginning of his retrograde. And between now and the 29th of December, he will move to 24 degrees of Capricorn. In fact, at the end of the month, he'll spend a whole bunch of days at that degree point because he ain't appearing to move at all as he slows down. But we'll talk about that when the time comes. In the meantime, if you know your chart well enough to understand that it's this sort of middle decan, the 10 to 20 degree swath of Capricorn is where the Mercury challenges will be. And so Mercury making contact to any planets in your chart that are in those middle 10 to 20 degree points will make this Mercury retrograde either easier or more difficult for you if you know your chart. And that's just a shout out to people who do. For those of you who don't know your charts well enough yet to make sense of where Capricorn is featuring in your chart, just understand that a Mercury retrograde in the sign of what's the goal and purpose, as we turn the year, where we're already thinking about the goals and the purposes and the directions we want to move in as we cross the year, I think it's going to be an important retrograde because it sets us up for how the new year is going to feel. The moment we cross into the new year, Mercury's moving backwards. So it becomes all the more important to pay attention to everything that comes up in your thoughts privately or in your communication with others, starting today till the 29th. Because everything that you bump into or trip on will be part of the retrograde process that starts on the 29th of December. So I like to call this retrograde shadow of any retrograde cycle like the brochure that describes the event that's yet to come. So start paying attention to things now so that the backward portion of Mercury's cycle is less bumpy. So last week, you mentioned, Zoe, that you weren't quite remembering where Gemini was in your chart or where the Mars retrograde is happening. But I have your chart, Zoe.
Oh my gosh, I was just about to say I forgot to look it up. Oh,
no worries, because I did, and I want to talk about it. Zoe did not know I was going to bring this up.
Let's do it.
But it's really interesting, Zoe, because where Mars is retrograding in your chart is the 3rd house. So that's the house of communication and thought and ideas and perceptions. So it's powerful for you that, and by the way, that is the house in the natural wheel ruled by Gemini. So your third house is ruled by the same sign that the third house naturally is ruled by, which is Gemini, the sign, one of the signs that is ruled over by Mercury. So your Mercury, your communication, your perception is where the action is with regard to a Mars retrograde, which is a period of time that helps you embody in a new way through how you're perceiving your life. But what's really interesting to me about your chart, Zoe, is that where Mars started this retrograde, which is 25 degrees of Gemini, is your what's called imum coli. It's the bottom of the chart, the security home hearth point. And so Mars hung out there for a while he was getting ready to station, which means that the entire sort of period, like mid-October, all the way through, when he then turned around in early November and through the sort of second week of November, Mars was doing all kinds of stuff right down there at the bottom of your chart. You were not going through an easy time late October, early November.
Yeah.
And was not a lot of stuff that was coming up have to do with your home and security and things that are foundational?
Yeah, I'd say like grief at a very deep and intimate level, and relationship, and home.
Well, your south node of the moon, which is your karmic point, which is the space that holds all of the stuff that you got to let go of, and it's like the holding place. Like if you have something you need to get rid of, but you're not quite ready, it's like, oh, I have a shelf on my south node. Just put it there until I'm ready to. So this Mars retrograde is also helping you process lots of old karmic wound. Old, and I mean old, like from the very beginning of your life. So this grief process that you're in is not only connected to this loss that is imminent and present, but the very concept of loss.
Yeah.
So it's an existential moment. And it all...
Oh, I agree with that.
And the purpose and the design is to help you align your perceptions with your embodiment at a more authentic level. And so last week we talked a little bit about my Mars experience in the 6th house, where I thought it was going to help me sort of amplify my physical fitness journey, but instead it's telling me to stop working out for a month or two and really reorient how I relate to what my body wants. And for you, it's about existential, what makes me feel secure in life and how do I change my perceptions so that I can embody my life at a higher level. And if you know, now I'm talking to you listeners out there, it's still a great time to pay attention to what house Mars in Gemini is retrograde in, especially maybe this weekend into this weekend, because we're about to go through a pretty juicy portion of Mars's retrograde cycle starting this weekend. All right, kids. So there are 3 of the triple transits that Mars is making that all bunch up together this Saturday, Sunday, and Monday upcoming. So truly, this Mars retrograde has healing as a primary theme. And here's kind of why. It's built into the triple transits that he's making. First and foremost, Mars is moving through a sextile with Chiron. That's a productive geometry whereby if we pick up the tools of healing, we can push our healing experience forward very powerfully. 60 degrees is the angle of potential. So when you have the planet of action and embodiment in this potential positive geometry with the great healer, nothing will happen if you're not putting effort and energy into your healing experience. But every tiny little bit that you do put in will yield tremendous results because we've got this really productive. You can sort of think of this. I don't know why I'm thinking about this image, but like I have one of my body workers will sometimes pull out a massage gun.
Oh, I love those.
Well, the first time he did it, I almost jumped off the table. But it's a good example of something that the machine can do that his hands cannot do exists because there's this well-heeled machine doing the extra deep healing work. That's like a sextile between Mars and Chiron. So that energy hits over the weekend. So if you've been paying attention to the Chiron inconjunct of the South Node that I just talked about at the top of the program, that's a great eliminator angle being held from the healer to that receptacle that is the past that the South Node is. Well, Mars is also hitting the South Node in this great eliminator angle, and that hits over the weekend as well. This is about making new choices that rise up out of the work we're doing in the below. Because remember, Mars is about action and choices. The great eliminator angle with the South Node says, we must, in fact, look at the past, see how we've chosen, move through the healing that's available to us so that we might choose anew, choose differently. And that's the power of Mars hitting the South Node of the Moon in the great eliminator angle. I will point out that any time you have two planets operating in a sextile, 60 degrees apart, and a third planet or point across the sky opposing the midpoint of those two sextiling planets, that creates a long, narrow triangle called a finger of God, and this is Chiron, Mars, and the South Node are creating a finger of God, where the two planets in the sextile are like the engine that's driving the mechanism, and then the pointy end on the other side of the cosmos says, well, what's being impacted by the two planets that are working so well together? So the planets that are working so well together are Mars and Chiron, generating healings that are exponentially greater if we pick up the tools to do them. And the thing that they are impacting is the South Node of the Moon, the past that we're trying to move away from. So not only is this an incredibly potentially healing pattern because of that sextile and the potential that's built into a 60-degree angle, the finger of God portion of it says that if I pick up healing activities now, the winds of fate will blow through my sails and push my ship forward in a fated or a God-driven kind of way. The bottom line is, pick up some tools of healing and you will move faster and further during this Mars retrograde than you could in regular times. There's a third energy that's on the side of this that's also hitting this weekend that's more of an agitation, where Mars is sesquisquaring Pluto. This is valuable because it is an agitation. It's a 135-degree angle, which I'm fond of saying is, incapable of doing anything. You can't make anything with 135 degrees, and you can't break anything with 135 degrees. But it's like the geometry of the itch that signals something's off, something's out of alignment, something needs your attention. And so with Mars doing this with Pluto, the lord of the underworld, this is about drives, like unconscious drives that we don't always have privy to how they're operating. We feel the impact of the drive. We move and go and do. Sometimes we don't even know why. That's drives in action. But there's lots of negative, shadowy artifacts from this transit, like issues of dominance or territorial disputes, compulsion and obsession, sexual responses that are not healthy and smooth, strategic thinking that's more about manipulation than flow. So you've got this agitation that lets us know what needs our attention, while the rest of the setup is not only facilitated to help us do some deep healing, but to allow ourselves to move in the next sort of logical new direction as this week becomes next week. So these energies are hitting Saturday, Sunday, and Monday. On Saturday, it's the inconjunct from Mars to the South Node. Then on Sunday, it's the sesquisquare to Pluto. Monday, it's the inconjunct to the South Node. Think of these rather than, well, what's Sunday going to be like versus Monday or Saturday? Just try to think of this as sort of the late weekend into early next week as everything that I just described. And if you want a hint about this, go back to around September 17th, give or take a couple of days, because that's when the sextile and the inconjunct rose up the first time. The agitation with Pluto happened on September 9th. You can look back to that for some kind of conflict arising maybe earlier in September that might have led to some kind of awareness of new possibility or healing around September 17th. And anything that you see related to those dates is likely to come up over this weekend. And then as we move through late January and mid-February, after Mars turns around the second week in January, we will be revisiting these energies again, kind of wrapping things up next year. But in the meantime, understand that though we're in a kind of quietish week in a quieter month, we have a very energized weekend into next week where the retrograding Mars is going to be tripping us up a little bit. So be prepared for things like delays or breakdowns or low energy or incredibly high energy or your body reacting in some sort of way. And pay attention to ideas about your goals and projects that either move a little bit more in a powerful, positive way, or the opposite, where you get, shown that something is not going to work out. It's a key weekend to kind of evaluate where your body is, what your actions and goals are lining up to be pointing towards, and in fact, what you think you might be working on next year based on what you're focusing on now. It's going to be a bit of a dicey weekend. We will talk about this again at the top of next week's podcast because this really sort of flows into next week. And just move a little slowly and mindfully over this upcoming weekend, kids. Have at it.
All right, it's dream segment time. Every week, Dr. Michael will interpret dreams that are sent in via email or take a live caller. If you would like your dream interpreted on the podcast, you can go ahead and email us at dreams@michaellennox.com. Hopefully your dream will make it onto the show. I have a very tiny email in dream this week, and it's more of a topical question.
Okay.
Okay, but first a personal question. I can't remember if it was last night or the night before because it's getting blurry, but I ended up right near multiple bodies of water. And I feel like that just means there's emotional things happening, or bodies of water I don't know, that's just emotional.
Well, yes. I mean, that's where we're going to start. Remember that I'm looking when I'm hearing a dream to be triggered by ideas, right? And then I let my voice follow those ideas.
Mm-hmm.
So, yes, the moment we're in the presence of water, you're having a dream where you're considering your emotional landscape at the moment, or maybe even in general. So the very next thing we would have to do to get like a deeper level or layer of meaning would be, what's the emotional sensation of the dream, and like what kinds of bodies of water, what behaviors in the bodies of water themselves.
Yeah. I just, because most of it I don't remember, but I just remember like I was laying next to a pool and I was kind of sad. And then I also remember either being next to a lake or the ocean or like swimming through it. I can't remember.
Interesting. Well, right, even just there, starting with the pool and being sad, pools are man-made. So they would relate to the emotional aspect that's sort of not only individual for you, the dreamer, but the kind of amount of emotion you can contain and still be like alive and in your body. So that first image is like, that's it. Like that's the tapped out ability for you to contain your emotional nature is well reflected by the image of you lying by a pool. And because you're sad in that dream image, then that's a picture that represents you at the sort of top of what you can contain. And it's enough to be like, there's a little extra here, so I feel sad. And then, a lake is a little bit more collective emotional consciousness, right? Because it's now not just your private little man-made pool. A lake might be peopled by other humans and animals in the more natural world, right? So we get into a more shared emotional sensibility with a larger body of water. And then, of course, the oceans reflect the deepest water, where water and emotion also mean the unconscious. Like even those three images follow the decans of water sign consciousness, where the first water sign is Cancer. Emotions at the personal level, like a swimming pool. Then we get to Scorpio, where water is more like weather on the planet, more collective, more shared. And then, of course, Pisces, the deep water, is the sign that rules the oceans.
I like that image.
So even just this dream sort of gives you, again, you don't remember much about it, and I'm just riffing on the little bits that you offered, every element of your emotional nature, your personal, your shared, and your transpersonal. Pool, lake, ocean.
Cool.
Yay.
Yeah, I'm thinking about themes this week, and that's why I asked you that. And then also, we have an email in Dreamer. Patricia's asking us about pregnancy. Both she and I are a little keen to know about pregnancy in dreams. She says, I've had a dream recently that I was pregnant and physically saw my big pregnant belly. Then, last night, I had a dream that my aunt, who is older, got a surrogate to carry triplets for her. I thought this was interesting because both of these dreams were really close together and on the topic of new life. I'm looking forward to hearing whether you can gather anything from that. Best, Patricia.
Well, sure. I mean, there's nothing quite like pregnancy to symbolize a new life.
Yeah, totally.
Right. So it's perfect dream symbol to understand that something is being born and being birthed. What I love about these two different dreams is they are actually quite different. I wish we had Patricia here to talk about her older aunt for a second, because that would be helpful, but I'll try to speak around not knowing.
Right.
So let's just start with the first dream, which is just that Patricia is pregnant. But that's not the juicy part of the dream, because a sense of I am birthing something is internal and private. But a big belly is evidence of something birthing, something brewing, something growing.
And that's the part that we want to interpret.
Right. Well, that's what she calls that out.
Right.
And to me, as someone who's like perceiving symbolic meaning, it's like kind of like what I did with the water, like that we always start with, if someone says anything about water in a dream, my little, emotional sort of receptor will be kicked up because, okay, we're having a dream about emotions, but like what else is being said in the dream? So it's the same thing here with Patricia. We know that it's a dream about possibility. But because she sees her big pregnant belly, it's kind of literal. Now I know that Patricia is, in fact, birthing something new. And it's coming soon because her belly is big with the possibility that she's birthing. So if that particular dream image was recent, she can put together the timing of that dream with what she might feel she's brewing to birth at a soon but not quite yet moment. But then we get a second snippet, which is a little more powerful because of the triplets, because of the numerology of 3.
Divine.
It's the number of divine creativity. It's quite literally mother, father, child. But it's all of the other triumvirates that we have, artist, canvas, painting. Anytime we have 2, we have the possibility to create a transcendent third. So when the image itself is of 3, we're already past, can we create a transcendent third? We are set up for that. So here's where I wish Patricia were here, because her older aunt getting a surrogate has some interesting notions. First of all, if she's older, then that could signal, she's done with her creative potential. And how often have we felt like that in life? Maybe not you, Zoe, because you're still, relatively young. It's a little early for you to be jaded of like, it's too late for me. But that's a common thing for people to bump into when considering their, desires. It's like, it's too late for me. I am, can't do that. But an older woman who wants to be a mother can get a surrogate to have the same experience of creativity, but to distance themselves from any ideas that they aren't capable. So I would want to put that out to Patricia as here's how to think of that second snippet, that it's her pregnancy in that dream is showing you that you have it in you to create something powerful, even amidst your personal private thoughts of maybe I can't, maybe it's too late, maybe I'm already done.
Wow.
But she too is carrying these triplets, which is similar to the first dream where she is pregnant, and visibly so. So both dreams are telling us that Patricia is up to something new and interesting. The dream is also telling us that there's some thoughts in there that might be dangerously diminishing by saying, I'm not capable. But that second dream says, yes, you are. Anything and everything is possible. Get yourself a surrogate and make a divine trinity of your own.
Thank you for listening to Conscious Embodiment, Astrology and Dreams with Dr. Michael Lennox. You can find us on Apple Music, the iHeartRadio app, and anywhere you find your favorite shows. Head on over to michaellennox.com for information on astrology readings, the Daily Astro Alert subscription, upcoming classes, and to join the mailing list.